Hello, and welcome to Planetside 2. In the last video, we covered how to find communities of players to play with to have a more enjoyable experience playing the game. But what if you found a community of players that likes to fly occasionally and you'd like to participate? This is where understanding flight controls and mechanics comes into play. The first thing that you're going to want to do is go to VR training, but how do you get there? Just like swapping to any other continent, you can go to the globe terminals at your warp gate and select VR training. But why am I sending you to VR training? VR training is a continent that allows you to test anything in the game for free. This includes weapons and vehicles, but you can also test combinations of cosmetic items that you'd like to see working together before you decide on a look for yourself. Yep, this looks pretty cool. I'm pretty happy with this. So, when you're in VR, what you want to do is run down to the aircraft terminals and spawn an Empire-specific fighter, or ESF for short. That's the Mosquito for the TR, the Scythe for the VS, or the Reaver for the NC. Now that you've spawned an ESF, move your mouse up and down. If what's happening on your screen makes sense to you, then great, you can skip the next step. But if you're like me and you have a psychotic episode when doing this, simply go into your general settings and change this checkbox to checked. Invert Vertical Fly. Now try moving your mouse up and down again. Is this better? Hopefully the answer was yes. Okay, moving on. Planetside 2's flight mechanics are different than any other game I know. Every aircraft in Planetside 2 is capable of switching between two flight modes. The two flight modes are normal and hover. The normal flight mode lets you fly like a fixed-wing aircraft from any other game. And the hover flight mode lets you fly like a helicopter in any other game. When you're in hover mode, you have two visual indicators. First, you can see that your engines rotate into the hover position, unless you're flying the Vanu's Scythe, which doesn't rotate the engines. And you also get a little H symbol in the top left of your vehicle's HUD. You can see when I accelerate, the H disappears, and if I slow back down to hover mode, it'll reappear. So let's go over the critical keys for flying. The WASD keys accelerate, decelerate, and yaw your aircraft. Your mouse movement controls pitch and roll. Before you ask, no, you can't change roll to keyboard and yaw to mouse. People have been asking for that option since release and it's still not available, so try to get used to these controls if you can. Next, your spacebar allows you to ascend your aircraft relative to your perspective. What this means is that if you roll your aircraft on its side and hold spacebar, your aircraft will pull in that direction like a helicopter. Your control key has the opposite effect to spacebar. It will try to push your vehicle down relative to your perspective. Your shift key is used for your afterburners. Your afterburners work like your light assault jetpack fuel. You get a short boost of speed, and then you have to wait for the fuel to magically refill your tanks. Something important to note is that your afterburner works differently in normal flight mode and in hover mode. In normal flight mode, it will simply give you a boost to your forward speed. But in hover mode, it will boost you in the same direction as your spacebar would. F is also a critical key binding. It's used for your aircraft's utility slot, but that won't come into play until you've started upgrading your aircraft. I'll be talking about upgrading aircraft in a later video. Your middle mouse button is also critical. It allows you to free look around your cockpit. The single most important thing that new players don't do while piloting is making sure they're aware of what's happening around them. You have to either be a significantly better pilot or get insanely lucky to kill someone that manages to ambush you from behind. So try your hardest to make sure you're constantly looking around for any enemy aircraft trying to jump you. Lastly, the T key will change your camera perspective from interior to exterior, just like in a ground vehicle. This can help with a lot of things, like orientation in a dogfight, peeking over mountains without actually exposing yourself, or landing. There's one other critical key binding for flying aircraft, but it's not bound to anything by default. This is the analog throttle key binding. I bind this to one of my thumb buttons on my mouse, but you could also bind it to X, for example. What analog throttle does is it cuts all power from your engines instantly. You might be asking, isn't that what holding S does? Not quite. Holding S will gradually decrease your throttle until it hits 0, like this. But analog throttle will cut all power instantly, allowing you to slow down much faster. And that does it for critical keys while flying. But there are two other critical things to know. First, anytime you fly, you want to go to your graphics settings and set your particles to medium or higher. This will make it much easier to see your traces and adjust your aim. Secondly, you want to always play as engineer while flying. The engineer has a passive ability called aircraft synergy that will slowly heal your aircraft over time while flying, so there's no reason to not use the engineer while flying. You can spawn an infinite amount of aircraft in VR training for free, so get practicing. A couple of drills I think would be good for a new player to practice are keeping your aim on a target while circle strafing them in hover mode. So for example, pick this Sundra as the point that you want to circle around, and use your spacebar to circle around it in hover mode while keeping your aim on it. Another drill that I think would be useful for beginner players is exiting hover mode quickly. You can do this by accelerating, pitching up, and engaging your afterburners all at the same time, like this. You can see that you almost instantly exit hover mode and engage fixed wing flight. The last maneuver that I would recommend new players get used to is something the community calls the reverse maneuver. This has been covered extensively by other content creators on YouTube, and simply typing ESF reverse maneuver into the YouTube search bar, you'll get 100 different tutorials on this maneuver. The basic idea is that you can fly backwards by using a combination of vertical thrust and pitching down while in hover mode. Okay, so now that you know some basics and hopefully practiced a little in VR, go out into the world and have a go at flying. The targets you want to be aiming for with the default ESF loadout are Valkyries, Harassers, and other ESF. Trying to kill anything else is going to be incredibly difficult for you. But don't be afraid to try. The worst that can happen is you waste some nanites. Don't worry, you get 50 nanites every minute. So you can easily waste an ESF every 7 minutes if you want to. Remember, practice makes perfect. The more you fly, the better you'll get. Every death is an opportunity for improvement. Okay, this concludes the beginner portion of this series. The next episode will begin to look at more intermediate concepts in the game. So if you're struggling to shoot accurately and you want to be more accurate with your infantry weapons, you'll have to watch the next episode where I'll cover weapon recoil management.